Well, Finance Minister Arun Jaitley, in an exclusive interview to ET Now, has spoken on the Land Bill and one rank, one pension fight. Listen in.
Thanks a lot for speaking to us, sir. Always a pleasure talking to you. The newspapers are divided on what you've done with the land bill. But I want to ask you, today is the 31st of August, the ordinance lapses. In your own words, this is one of the worst drafted legislations. And you're not just talking about the content, you're also talking about the legislative part of it. Why do you then let it lapse? Do you believe, and the perception is that you've gone back on the land bill. Do you concede so?
Well, perception may be for lack of understanding of those who create the perception. And therefore, it's extremely important for those in public life, politics, policy making and media to understand the import of what we are doing. I have some reservations on the 2013 law on its content.
That's right.
Its content may hamper India's development. But it's in terms of legislative drafting that I have regarded it as one of the worst legislatively drafted legislations.
That's right.
For example, it creates a huge amount of ambiguity as to whether consent is required or not required.
That's right.
The draftsperson probably wanted to provide for consent. They ended up with a draft which probably in many cases exempts consent. Now, when they exempt consent, can private sector also participate in that or not? I'm on a distinction between Section 2.1 and Section 2.2 of the Act. I'm going to elaborate this very shortly in a written piece that I'm going to say.
Right.
It creates all kinds of ambiguities. Now, those have to be corrected. For instance, on social impact assessment, if you add the various steps, it can take you to 52 months.
That's right.
But then it says not more than 6 months, not more than 3 months. Now, can that be compressed? Even if you want a social impact assessment? We honestly felt, and all the chief ministers, all the states that we consulted said, please amend it. Once we took steps to amend it, the Congress changed its stance and said we are going to oppose it. And you have a parliamentary stalemate, that's a reality. We again called the chief ministers. And the chief minister said, we want some changes. If you can do it at the center, please do it. If there is a stalemate, it's a concurrent list subject, you leave it to the states. Now, on your query, that is it a rollback or a step backwards? What did we say in Section 10 in order to remove that ambiguity in the 2013 law? All we said is there are 5 purposes which are really identified with development of rural areas.
Right.
The appropriate government, which is the state government, is entitled to exempt any or all of them.
That's right.
So under the ordinance, we empowered the states. The state said, don't empower us under the ordinance. It's a concurrent list subject. You assure us you will give consent to our proposals.
That's
the
right.
effect is actually the same. Therefore, rather than allow the parliamentary stalemate to carry on and on and on, you follow an alternative route, and that alternative route is that you empower the states by assuring them, we give you flexibility, whatever changes you want to bring out in the law, please bring out.
Fair point indeed, sir, and I get your point. That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is, and a lot of people have said this, that you have the might of numbers behind you. Why is it that you did not take the opposition head on? Because the opposition has also changed its stance on this. Why is it that you did not call for a joint session of parliament and let this pass through? Because
you see, there is a provision for a joint session. The process of the joint session is that one house accepts it, the other house rejects it. And because in the upper house, we are in a minority, the opponents probably may have had larger numbers.
That's right.
So they decided to indefinitely delay it. We therefore referred it to a select committee where there was also a stalemate. And then you have to wait for a particular period of time, which may amount to almost a year before a joint session is called. Now, should we continue to involve ourselves in that traffic jam, or should we take the bypass which is a faster and a easier bypass with very low political costs.
Are you still hopeful of some kind of a resolution coming in the Rajya Sabha, considering this is with a panel that's a joint panel, or have you given up on the parliamentary rules?
The bill to replace the ordinance is before the committee, and I'm sure there are some provisions on which a consensus change is going to be brought out.
Okay.
For instance, take a provision like if land is not the 5-year rule. I can understand if within 5 years a project doesn't commence, you restore the land back. If it's not completed, can a township be completed in 5 years?
So you'll have pockets of agriculture.
You could have pockets of agriculture and pockets of built-up areas. Now, these are impractical situations, and that's why I call it the worst drafted legislation ever. Because in drafting perception, it doesn't actually take into consideration the realities of the situation.
So what a lot of corporate India people are saying who are looking at this legislation with a lot of hope is that because it's now been left to the states, they are not looking at a resolution at the earliest, because every state will...
That's rightly so. Tamil Nadu has already initiated a process and made some recommendations, and I'm sure you will have two categories of states. Those who are content with the 2013 law.
That's right.
And those who want land for developmental purposes.
And that's where investments will be.
And that's where investments will come in. And frankly speaking, all the Congress states, Maharashtra and Haryana at that time ruled by the Congress, led the suggestion for a change in the 2013 law.
So I have a quick last question on land before I move on to the conspiracy theory of a golden handshake on the GST. But on the land, so the last question is that you have very ambitious targets. You are looking at industrialization, which is going to create jobs. You're looking at urbanization. You're looking at smart cities. What kind of a setback, if at all, will a lack of a central law that you are thinking of envisage have?
I don't call it a setback. I think it's a step forward. Rather than involve yourself in a political stalemate and remain parked in a traffic jam situation, you take the alternative route, which has lesser political cost, allow greater flexibility to the states, and states which want to get the benefit out of it, get the benefit out of it, and there is no complaint anybody has.
The Prime Minister says we are back to before your government came to power because of the stalemate that the opposition created. My last question on land, sir, is that did you at one level underestimate the political opposition to this? Because there has been a lot of grandstanding.
You see, land is always a sensitive issue.
That's right.
And therefore, there is no question of underestimating the opposition. I have not the least doubt that the opposition is for positioning purposes. After all, the chief ministers of a party come up and say we want changes, and then the party says no, because of political reasons we'll oppose the changes. And therefore it was the change of stance that actually created the problem.
It's actually competitive federalism that will perhaps take care of the land legislation, but the conspiracy theory in New Delhi, and especially in Lutyens Delhi, that I'm going to take a cue from is that the understanding is that you let the opposition will let the GST through because you've let the states handle the land subject. Is there any truth to that? Because the special session was being talked about.
You see,
where are talks on the GST, sir?
You see, I've been in touch with the Congress party. Mr. Venkaiah Naidu has been in touch with the Congress party. I have not the least doubt in saying that they are very unsure of their stand on the GST.
That's right.
They were the ones who pioneered the GST. And they are the ones who are now picking holes in their own proposals. Now, that's a politically unsustainable situation. And therefore, in the budget session, they told us, well, we'll do it in the next session. Now they say we are not against the GST, but we had some suggestions. All right, we've discussed the suggestions with them. And now they say, don't do it right now, do it after a little while. You see, they'll have one pretext or the other.
But at one level, does the global turmoil, and I will just speak to you about that in a bit, rest the moral authority both on the government and the opposition to let the GST
You see,
through?
I have always believed there is a spread of political power. It's a constitution amendment. You need a larger support.
That's right.
And therefore, the nature of discourse in India has to change. Seeing the global situation and seeing the impact of that global situation on India, can we convert it into an opportunity? Are we just busy scoring political points against each other, or are we responding to the situation by taking steps which will enable India to take advantage of the current global situation which has been created.
You know, I'm going to take a cue from what you just said, because many people believe this is a historic opportunity for India to seize what the growth engine that China will no longer be. India can seize that opportunity, and you've said that in an interview to the BBC. But to the same broadcaster, Governor Rajan said that India is a long way away because of the size of the two economies.
I think both the statements are correct.
How do you justify that?
You see, China was singularly shouldering 50% of the global growth.
That's right.
India at its very best can shoulder 10 to 15% of the global growth. And therefore the size of our economies is different. So the governor is absolutely correct when he analyzes this as an economist. But at the same time, if we are able to shoulder about 15% of the global growth on our shoulders, particularly because of a series of factors, we probably are the only economy which last year grew by 7.3%.
Right.
This year we hope to better that figure. And therefore, in that range, there are not too many major economies. China slowed down, and therefore the world needs more viable shoulders to carry it on.
That's right.
Today, the worst affected sectors are commodities and oil. We are net importers and not exporters. And therefore, we are buying products at a cheaper price. We don't have to sell them or undersell them at a cheaper price.
Yes.
So we are the beneficiaries of the slowdown in the oil prices and the commodity prices. We are not a part of China's production chain in that sense.
Yes.
We have a huge domestic demand. And one of the weaknesses of our economy is we need to increase that domestic demand a little bit. And therefore, under the current situation, if investors who are pulling monies from wherever they can pull out and are looking for alternative avenues to invest in, if we carry on our reform process, supposing we have the GST through either by the center or by the states, we can get our land laws a little liberalized.
Yes.
We take the necessary monetary policy steps, our private sector investment picks up, then of course our ability to move into still a higher range of economic growth is there, and that's where the real opportunity lies for India.
You've actually nailed it, because in an interview with us, your chief economic advisor said the same thing, that in an opportunity that's coming up, every hand has to be on board, including monetary policy. In the Jackson Hole Symposium, Governor Rajan says there is scope to cut rates and we are still in an accommodative phase. But so the question now is, are we just going to keep talking about whether there should be a rate cut, or has the debate moved to the quantum of the rate cut?
You see, I think
the era of tokenism.
all I will say is that inflation in India is broadly under control.
And the risk is really deflation now.
And you have low oil prices, you have low commodity prices. Though August and September are not going to be very exciting from the point of view of monsoon, at least July was a very good month for monsoon. So production in agriculture is going to be significantly better than last year. And therefore, I don't expect food prices to rise very much either. Now, in such a situation, inflation being under control, how much is the rate cut? That's the prerogative of the Reserve Bank. And therefore, I do see Reserve Bank as a very professional institution will certainly take note of all these factors when it decides next time.
Have they been a little stubborn though on their monetary policy stance so far?
Well, it's not
political pragmatism.
You see, people can have different views, but when an institution like the Reserve Bank, with all its professionalism and capacities, is empowered, we must learn to trust their judgment.
I know I'm pushing my time with you, and I will accommodate just one more question here, because this is going to land on your table and you will have to negotiate this through. You're going to finally sign off on that check. The OROP issue, it's a sensitive issue. You're politically committed to this, but do you have the fiscal room, and are you opening a Pandora's box of sorts here?
I have been very, very vigilant about fiscal prudence, and therefore my job is really that of a housewife, in the sense that you must measure every rupee that the house spends, so that you don't overspend and then you have to borrow. And if you start borrowing beyond a point and indulge in fiscal discipline, what happened on Monday, 2 weeks ago, is going to be repeated every now and then. That's not a situation India can accept. And therefore, you now have the pay commission recommendation coming in. You have our commitment to the OROP, to which we stand by. And the only difficulty is, what is the arithmetical translation of the phrase OREP? I have my own formula on what OROP means. Somebody else may have his own formula on what OROP means. But it has to be within reasonable and a rational criteria. You can't have an OROP where pensions are revised every month or every year.
That's right. It has to be at least 5 or 10 years.
It doesn't happen anywhere in the world. And I am sure our armed forces, which are very, very patriotic, very, very professional, including our veterans, we accept the principle, we will implement the principle, but then let us not create precedents which are going to set other segments of the society also to start demanding similar benefits. And therefore, it is necessary. We would like to safeguard the interest of those soldiers who retire at the age of 35 or 38, and therefore the society must protect them for the rest of their life. And therefore, some higher pensions for them on a special formulation is something which is understandable. But then it can't be revised every year.
The political planks and the political promises may actually have to be borne by you. And so are you in a bind of sorts here because you have to manage very tricky finances?
No, according to me, you see, that space in Indian political thought process and mind, which thinks rationally, that merely on emotion you don't make concessions which are unreasonable.
True.
So can everyone come and start asking for annual revisions of pensions? Can the BSF do it? Can the CRPF do it? Obviously, the thinking India will say that this is not the right step to take. You can't create a liability which future generations have to pay. And therefore, on a rational criteria, OROP, certainly we should be able to implement it very soon.
Thanks very much for speaking to us. India's Finance Minister in conversation here with the Times Network.